Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about the 10 best 80s horror movies going year by year.
Death is not the end. I'll take your soul.
And let's get to the list.
Stay away from the fog. What you can't see won't hurt you. It will kill you.
The Fog is a 1980 supernatural horror movie. Directed and scored by John Carpenter, it stars Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Tom Atkins. An unearthly fog rolls into a small coastal town, exactly 100 years after a ship sank mysteriously in its waters.
This is KB Antonio Bay. Stevie Wayne here, and let me be the first to wish Antonio Bay a happy birthday. We're 100 years old today, and keep a watch out for that fog bank.
So my pick for 1980 is The Fog, and I love this movie. I've gone to sleep at night watching this movie countless times. There's just something about its mood and atmosphere that just draws me in no matter how many times I've seen it. And this whole cast is fantastic. They really are the who's who of 1980s horror. But the story gets creepy and just feels like an old folktale or some kind of story that you would tell around a campfire. And I mean, that's how this movie even opens. The atmosphere of the fog and the ghost in it, it's just amazing. It's one of my favorite John Carpenter movies and one of his more unsung ones at that. But I just adore it and definitely had to pick it for my 1980 pick. Evil Dead is a 1981 supernatural horror movie. Written and directed by Sam Raimi in his feature directorial debut. It stars Bruce Campbell, Ellen Sandweiss, and Betsy Baker. 5 friends travel to a remote cabin in the woods, where they unknowingly release flesh-possessing demons.
I fear that the only way to stop those possessed by the spirits of the book is through the act of bodily dismemberment.
So there was no way that I could pick any other movie from 1981. This movie is just so iconic, and the fact that they did this on such a tiny budget and pulled off what they did to this day is breathtaking, because the special effects are so creative and unique, and just all the different ways that they were able to do things. It's just a lot of fun, especially if you get a chance to watch behind the scenes. But as much as this franchise has gone on to become kind of campy, and then more recently it's gotten serious again, a lot of people forget that this movie really is scary. This movie really is creepy. It wasn't meant to be cheesy. It wasn't really meant to be camping. The campy kind of humor that it does have is just more based on its budgetary restraints. It's just full of so many iconic moments, and definitely one of my favorite horror movies ever made. The Thing is a 1982 sci-fi horror movie. Directed by John Carpenter and based on the 1938 John W. Campbell novella, Who Goes There? It stars Kurt Russell, Keith David, and Wilford Brimley. It tells the story of a group of American researchers in Antarctica who encounter a parasitic extraterrestrial life form.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open.
So if you've watched this channel for any length of time, you've probably heard me mention that I consider this to be the greatest horror movie ever made. Because everything from the score, the cinematography, the way that it's shot in general, the pacing, the way it builds anxiety and tension between its characters. The special effects are just incredible, and still to this day, as far as practical effects, probably the best that have ever been done. It's just so creative and creepy and absolutely uncomfortable throughout. And the entire cast do an amazing job of just feeling relatable and like real people you would know. This film is straight up legendary classic status and definitely my pick for 1982. Christine is a 1983 supernatural horror movie. Directed by John Carpenter and written by Stephen King. It stars Keith Gordon, John Stockwell, and Alexander Paul. A nerdish boy buys a strange car with an evil mind of its own, and his nature starts to change to reflect it.
We're not finished yet!
I was recently able to see this in a theater, and it's really cool because it came out so long ago, I never got a chance to see it in a theater. And so being able to see it now was really fantastic, and it was the new modern, 4K version of it, so it looked amazing. And I was really surprised on just how much this movie holds up. And it's funny because everybody talks about it as a Stephen King movie, and forget in a lot of ways that this is a John Carpenter directed film. And it's fun to watch this and kind of think about who affected it more. Like, who does it resemble style-wise more? A Stephen King or John Carpenter? Because a lot of times with John Carpenter, we think of his movies as one of his. We don't think about them as who was the writer. We always just kind of credit him, it's his movie, it's a John Carpenter movie. But you can really see and feel John Carpenter's presence on this film. And it's no wonder why it's one of the best Stephen King adaptations. And to me, that really shows how good of a director John Carpenter is, probably as much or more than any other movie that he's done. The pacing of it is great, the way it's shot, the shot selections in general, the wardrobe, everything about this movie still really works. And I've heard people mention that they were talking about remaking this. And I'm not sure if that could work because I feel like that age, that period of time, that wardrobe, that car in particular, just all of it really works. It has this little bit of a grittiness that the early 80s had that I just don't know if it could work being at least modernized. Now, if you were to kind of set it in the same time period, maybe it would work, but then it's kind of one of those, what's the point? Because if you're not changing it, why remake it? Either way, I think this movie is incredible and doesn't get enough credit. It really doesn't, because you just don't hear people talk about it that often in the horror community, especially when you're talking about John Carpenter. And I think that really should change. So I think it's one of the best 80s horror movies and absolutely deserves a spot on this list.
Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes, Nightmare on Elm Street.
A Nightmare on Elm Street is a 1984 supernatural slasher, written and directed by Wes Craven. It stars Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, and John Saxon. A teenager must uncover the dark truth concealed by her parents after she and her friends become targets of the spirit of a serial killer.
You could just see cuts happening.
What did that, Lieutenant?
I don't know.
Come on now. Did you honestly think any other movie could be in the 1984 spot? Nightmare on Elm Street is horror. It's so iconic. It completely changed the landscape of horror as much as any other horror movie ever made. Because Freddy Krueger has just become such a big icon in the horror movement. He really put horror into that pop culture zeitgeist that we have really never seen except for maybe Michael Myers, but I would argue that Freddy is even beyond that, because in the 80s he made rap songs. He was on lunchboxes. It was insane. He was everywhere all the time. It was truly a phenomenon that we have probably never seen. The closest I can think of is when It came out and the whole new Pennywise craze, but even that wasn't anywhere near the level of what Freddy was in the 1980s. But this movie is fun, but creepy and really uncomfortable. Freddy is much darker and more sinister in this, definitely than he would go on to become, because he got more silly and more goofy and campy as time went on. But in this first film, he really is menacing and terrifying. But this movie is horror royalty and without a doubt had to be on this list.
send more cops.
The Return of the Living Dead.
The Return of the Living Dead is a 1985 sci-fi comedy horror movie. Written and directed by Dan O'Banion. It stars Thom Matthews, James Karen, and Linnea Quigley. Two bumbling employees at a medical supply warehouse accidentally release a deadly gas, and the vapors cause the dead to rise again as zombies.
You see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
Sure.
They ship those bodies. Well, say hello.
This movie is just so incredibly fun. It really is one of the more fun horror movies, period, and especially for the 80s. I love the sense of humor that it has, the look and feel, the costume designs, the special effects involved. I really love how the zombies look. They're just incredible in this, but it just has this real fun, partying kind of vibe about it that really reminds me so much of the 1980s. But it also has a fantastic mood and atmosphere to it. Everything from the scene in the cemetery, which, you know, Linnea Quigley's scene is definitely not forgettable, but just the look of it when it rains, and the way the zombies look coming out of the mud. It's just a fantastic movie, visually as well as the script, because it's just downright so funny. It's one of my favorite horror comedies, and so I had to put it as my 1985 pick.
Help me. Please, help me.
The Fly is a 1986 sci-fi horror movie. Directed and co-written by David Cronenberg, it stars Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, and John Getz. The plot focuses on a brilliant yet eccentric scientist who begins to transform into a giant man-fly hybrid after one of his experiments goes horribly wrong.
Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I had them analyzed, but they were definitely not human.
This is one of my favorite horror movies, period. This movie is tragic, it's full of drama, but the body horror in it is just incredible. This is why I love David Cronenberg. This really is him at his very best, because everything about this movie just leaps off the screen. Jeff Goldblum's performance, Gina Davis's performance, they're both just incredible in this movie. And like I said, it's such a tragic kind of love story, and it just feels like a classic. Like, it really harkens back to those old tragedy horror movies like Frankenstein. It just has that, you know, Bride of Frankenstein almost kind of feel about it. And there's just so many incredible skin crawling scenes, things that just definitely make you squirm in your seat. This definitely is a master class in horror filmmaking, and absolutely my pick for 1986.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Hellraiser is a 1987 British supernatural horror movie. Written and directed by Clive Barker, it stars Ashley Lawrence, Claire Higgins, and Doug Bradley. A woman discovers the newly resurrected, partially formed body of her brother-in-law, so she starts killing for him to revitalize his body so he can escape the demonic beings pursuing him. Man, what an incredible movie this is. It holds up so well. It really is, to this day, just chilling. It's horrific. It's uncomfortable. Everything about the way this is put together, I feel like, is absolutely timeless when it comes to horror. And fun fact, when I got my first tattoo, which is under here and I can't show you, I actually was watching Hellraiser for the first time while I was getting my tattoo at 16 years old. It's a pretty cool, memorable experience, but this movie definitely left its mark in me, no pun intended. But I still just love this movie. I adore it. No matter how many times I've seen it, it always makes my skin crawl. But in a good way, in a way that's fun if you're a horror fan. But there's just so many memorable moments in this, not to mention the creation of Pinhead and all the other Cenobites. They're just incredible and some of the most unique horror figures we've ever seen. Beyond that, Clive Barker is legendary status, and so is this movie, and 100% deserves my 1987 pick.
Don't let them bury me. I'm not dead.
The Serpent and the Rainbow.
The Serpent and the Rainbow is a 1988 horror movie, directed by Wes Craven with a script by Richard Maxwell, and is loosely based on a true story. It stars Bill Pullman, Kathy Tyson, and Zakes Moquet. An anthropologist goes to Haiti after hearing rumors about a drug used by black magic practitioners to turn people into zombies.
Somebody brought him back from the grave. And I want to know how they did it.
This is another one of my absolute favorites. This is one too that I hate the fact that I don't hear more people talk about it. It really is one of the more underrated horror movies of the 80s. And it's really incredible because it's done by Wes Craven, so you would think, you'd hear more about it, but you really don't. But it's absolutely thrilling and bone-chilling, especially when you know that this is based on real events. This is really about a lot of things that actually went on or still might go on down in Haiti. But it's a great mystery as well as you follow Bill Pullman throughout as he goes down this wild rabbit hole and gets drugged and just all kinds of crazy stuff happens to him. The funny thing is, the behind the scenes of this movie are just as wild and insane. But I think this movie is truly special, and if you for whatever reason have never seen this, this should be the next movie that you watch.
We had an awful good time.
What did you do?
What did you do? Pet Sematary.
Pet Sematary is a 1989 supernatural horror movie, directed by Mary Lambert and based on Stephen King's 1983 novel of the same name. It stars Del Metcalf, Fred Gwynne, and Miko Hughes. After tragedy strikes, a grieving father discovers the ancient burial ground behind his home, with the powers to raise the dead.
What did we do tonight, Judd?
What we did, Lois, was a secret.
So this was my introduction to horror. I had seen a few things prior to this, like Jurassic Park, more thriller-ish type of stuff, but this was my first real, legit horror experience. And I was on a trip visiting family as a young teenager and watched it all by myself, and it scared the bejesus out of me. But it also gave me this taste and love for horror that's just grown and grown and grown. Because everything from Fred Gwynne's performance to the cinematography, the way it's shot, Miko Hughes, it's just creepy, it's fun, it's spooky and eerie. I love the props and set design, the special effects, even Church the Cat. This movie is so much damn fun. And I don't care what anybody says, I think it still holds up and it's a fantastic movie. So it absolutely was my pick for 1989. So that wraps up the 1980s, guys. If you enjoyed this, let me know. I'd love to hear down below what are your picks for year by year 1980s picks. And if you enjoyed this, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and ding that little bell, because that is the best way to keep track of this channel. And when I post videos like this, and I post videos like this every single week, I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys absolutely mean the world to me. And if you would like to find out how you can help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or if you want to become a channel member and help support the channel in that way, there's a button right down there that says join. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button, and remember, guys, horror can be fun. If you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me rank 10 underrated werewolf movies, and I'll see you guys next time.